Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bridges of Belonging. My name's Andrea Carey, and this is another really great week. I'm looking forward to sharing with everyone. I want to start off by acknowledging the territory that I'm on today, which is the territory of the Coast Salish people and the home of the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. And I'm just so grateful for their amazing stewardship over centuries, and for me to be able to be here as a guest during our COVID times. And I know many of you are across the country in different territories, so I hope you can take a moment today to just acknowledge the territories you're on and maybe learn a little bit about them. So today I'm really grateful to be joined by a couple of incredible colleagues and friends, and to listen to their stories and learn a little bit about their journeys through Paralympic sport and through sports that they love, and what that's meant in terms of their career trajectories and family and their sense of belonging as they've gone through that journey. So just a reminder around protocol for Zoom, we just ask that people stay on mute and with your cameras off throughout this session. And we're going to get started with a quote. So I always kick off with a quote. I haven't done a quote from Brené Brown on Bridges of Belonging yet, but she is one of my favorites. So I thought today I would kick off with that. So this is from her Braving the Wilderness book, which is really all about belonging. So if you're looking for some belonging reading, I would highly recommend this one. So here's our quote. Stop walking through the world looking for confirmation that you don't belong. You will always find it because you've made that your mission. Stop scouring people's faces for evidence that you're not enough. You will always find it because you've made that your goal. True belonging and self-worth are not goods. We don't negotiate their value with the world. The truth about who we are lives in our hearts. Our call to courage is to protect our wild heart against constant evaluation, especially your own. No one belongs here more than you. So with that, I'll welcome our two guests. So Michele Stillwell is a 6-time Paralympic gold medalist in both basketball and track, 9-time world champion and a world record holder for the 100 meter, 200 meter, and 800 meters. She's a former cabinet minister, now serving her second term as a member of the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia for Parksville Qualicum. She's the opposition critic for tourism, arts, and culture. Michele is a passionate advocate for healthy, active living and for people with disabilities and children with special needs. She's been an ambassador, spokesperson, business owner, and is in the BC and Manitoba Halls of Fame. And Michele and I had one of our last big nights out right before COVID. So she's also a friend, and I just really always appreciate the time we get together. So this is really special to have you here today, Michele. So thank you. Joey Johnson is considered one of the best wheelchair basketball players in the world. He is renowned for his intensity and toughness in the paint, and he knows how to generate plays by creating space for himself and his teammates. At the age of 8, Joey was diagnosed with a degenerative hip disease and began playing wheelchair basketball the following year after being introduced to the sport by a friend. His dedication is the key to his success in the sport. Once he sets his sights on a goal, he doesn't give up until he's achieved it. His career with Team Canada began in 1995, nearly 2 decades with the national team. He's competed in 5 Paralympic Games, captured back-to-back gold medals in 2000 and 2004, silver medal in 2008, and another gold medal in 2012. He also seized a world championship title in 2006 and was inducted into the Canadian Paralympic Hall of Fame in 2019, which is when I got to formally meet Joey. So welcome to both of you. We're going to kick it over to Michele to get us started with some opening remarks about who she is and just sharing a little bit more about her story.
Well, thanks, Andrea, and thanks for having me here. It's quite an honor to have been asked to join you. I too want to, with respect and gratitude, acknowledge the traditional territories that we're on, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations here in Victoria. Although my sign says Vancouver, I am in Victoria right now. I love the opening quote that you started with. Brené Brown is one of my favorite authors as well. I've enjoyed many of her books and learned a great deal from her. So, I was thinking how to start off and introduce myself. And it's that whole idea of how you identify yourself and how I represent myself and how I present myself to others. Because when you get introduced, as you introduced me with the bio, it's all about your sort of your accolades and your accomplishments, but that's not truly who I am or what I stand for or what I believe in. And so I think, the one thing that was missing in the bio was I'm a mom. I'm a mom of a son with autism, and he's been my saving grace to educate me and build my strength and encourage me to never give up, not only in my own life, but on him. So that's sort of my core is about family and keeping that family unit together. The other stuff is just, I guess, defines who I am and what type of person I am. I'm very driven, I'm competitive, and I enjoy a good debate, and that's probably what got me into the line of work that I'm in now. So again, just so grateful for you to have me as a guest here today.
Thank you. That's a great way to start us off. And we'll look forward to hearing more about your family and Kai a little bit later. Joey, over to you to give us a little bit more of an in-depth intro into you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Who I am, it's good. As Michele says, you can get defined very easily through your accolades and stuff. But who I am personally, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I have 3 kids, but I'm also very competitive, and I guess that's how I get defined a lot because of my accolades through sport. When I was 8 years old, I was diagnosed with a hip disease called leg perthes. I was a very active kid before that. I played every sport possible, primarily hockey, as pretty much every Canadian boy tries to do. And when that was taken away from me, when I got my hip disease, I went through a bit of a period of, I would say, depression. And then I found adaptive sport through a lot of different work from my parents, through friends. And I gravitated towards wheelchair basketball and kind of made that who I was over the next 20 years of my life. Wheelchair basketball took me all over the world. I got an education in the US because of it. I've traveled through all of Europe and lived in Australia for a while playing it. So I am a very passionate person. I'm a driven person, and I think sport creates all kinds of avenues and opportunities for people. So I'd say that's who I am. I'm a person who loves to see people achieve different things, and my avenue of doing that is through sport. So.
Fantastic. So you two met through sport, through wheelchair basketball. Who wants to start by telling us a little bit about that? Because I know that's an important part of Michele's story in particular, but I'm sure that was a pretty poignant moment for both of you.
I'll let Michele take this one because she remembers it better than I do, obviously.
I thought you would kick it off. I'd like to hear your version. Well, I think certainly, if our discussion today is about belonging, I think when I had my injury, I was 17 years old. I was 3 weeks before my graduation. I was piggyback riding on a friend. I fell backwards, broke my neck, and my life changed in an instant. And I was very athletic before my injury. I competed in basketball, ringette, baseball, loved swimming and water skiing and doing everything the boys were doing. And when I had my injury and I was told that, I would likely never walk again, I was pretty shocked about the chance of not having sport in my life again. And that's where my thinking was. And it was when I was still in the hospital, in the rehab center, where I was approached by one of our former teammates who had a family member who said, have you ever thought of playing wheelchair basketball? And I actually didn't even know about wheelchair basketball at the time, and was encouraged to go check out a wheelchair basketball practice at the University of Winnipeg. And lo and behold, that's where I wheeled into the gym, still with my halo brace on because I was in rehab. And Joey and the rest of the team were weaving up and down the court and throwing up layups, and I was mesmerized by it. And I felt immediately that sense of belonging, and that there was suddenly a group of individuals that I could identify with, that I had just had this life-changing injury, and as much as my friends were my core, none of them really understood what I was going through or what the changes meant for me. And I was still trying to adjust to those things. And it was through my time with the wheelchair basketball team. So that first visit was the initial like, oh, I want to do this. And I was stuck from day one. And I kept going back, and Joey will attest, I was pretty weak at the beginning. I couldn't even get the ball above my head like 3 feet, never mind in a hoop. So, it was my time in wheelchair basketball where I felt that people understood and people were there to help and advise and give me, tidbits on how to live my life differently and what I was capable of, and my being able to see what they were able to do boosted my own confidence. It allowed me to see what the potential was and what the possibilities were. And so that's sort of where it all started. And that was, I hate to say it, but like more than 25 years ago.
I don't know if that's possible, because didn't we just decide you were still in your 30s? Okay, Joey, what about you? What do you remember that? And tell us a little bit about maybe your belonging experience within basketball.
Yeah, I do remember when Michele first started coming out, and coming from a province and a city like Winnipeg in Manitoba, we don't always have large numbers for people participating in adaptive sports. So, when you get someone new and who's eager to come out, it definitely stands out in your mind. But yeah, credit to Michele, because she spearheaded Manitoba getting a women's team going here and all that. So it was definitely some memorable times in my life. But similar to Michele, when I was 8 years old and got my disability, and is my mom who found out about adaptive sports, and there's a guy who was playing by the name of Jake Smelly at the time, and he encouraged me to go. We used to have a kids program, and it happened I want to say it was like every Tuesday and Saturday, where you just go out and they introduced you to all sports. It was basically like you go hang out and play tag. And that's where I started. And I remember my mom telling me about this, like, Joey, we're going to go see what this is about. And I'm like, no. I was in a bit of a denial that I needed a chair or adaptive equipment at all to play in sport. And I'm like, no, don't want to. And she basically dragged me out. And this one was at the Duckworth as well. And I remember sitting on the sideline, they're encouraging me to get into the sports chair. And I use that term loosely because I think it was a quadra back when I started off. And for people who know what a quadra chair is, it's not quite the same as what a sports chair is nowadays. But I was watching all these kids just fly around the court, and I want to say they're playing British Bulldogs. And because of that competitive nature, the juices I had in me, I was like, these kids are amazing. Like, I can't believe what they're doing. So it's almost intimidating to me at first. I'm like, I don't want to get in a chair because these kids are going to make me look silly. And, with some cajoling and stuff, people pushing me, they finally convinced me to get into the chair. And I remember being on that court, and there's a few kids that were just so fast and blowing by me, but that was the best thing for me. And I felt like I belonged at that time because it got my competitive juices going, just like when I got to compete in able-bodied sports, and you got to be around all your peers, whether it was on the ice rink or whether it was on a basketball court. I was around a bunch of my peers again, doing something that just got my competitive juices going. And that helped push me, because all these kids are so much faster than me and spinning circles around me. And I could, getting blisters all over my hands and could barely move. But I hated to lose. So that pushed and motivated me to keep going back every week. And, eventually I got better.
And Joey, your journey has not just been as an athlete. In your bio and introduction, we didn't really talk about what you're doing now, but why don't you share a little bit about your work as a coach now, and sort of the journey with the national team and what that looks like, and how you facilitate belonging and connection in what you're doing currently?
Yeah, well, after the London 2012 games, I decided that had enough of traveling, basically was my motivation to retire as an athlete. And I joined the real world for a couple of years there. And I got a sales job. I was covering about a third of North America, and it really kept me busy. And I was on the road again all the time. And it was at that time, it was the British team came knocking on my door and asked me if I'd be willing to help out their program in heading into the Rio Games. And I remember talking to my wife at the time, and she's like, well, if you're going to be on the road all the time and be miserable, you might as well be back on the road, but doing something that you love to do. So she kind of encouraged me to do it. So I helped out the British men's team going into the Rio Games. Things went really well with them, really strong program. They ended up winning the World Championships in 2018. And then I went, they asked me to relocate back over to Europe into GB, and I just didn't want to relocate my family at that time, so I kind of stepped back from them, and Canada came knocking on my door. Now I'm currently the assistant coach for the men's program here, and which I absolutely love, getting to help out the Canadian program again. I really feel like I belong in that program. It's kind of the program I obviously grew up in, and giving back to the younger generation of all the things I was able to learn over the years. Coaching, I find, just comes naturally to me. Michele kind of made the comment earlier, I'm the strong, silent type, but I also feel that helps carry my message. People know that I'm not just there, blowing smoke at them or anything, that when I have something to say, there's a lot of weight behind it, there's a lot of truth behind it, and so I find that people are a little bit more receptive to when I speak.
And how about you, Michele? You started in basketball, you transitioned to another sport, now you're in politics. Tell us a little bit about sort of how that journey played out for you, and where and when you felt connected and belonging within that.
Yeah, so I did wheelchair basketball from 1994, I believe was when I started and met Joey. And actually my whole career in Manitoba, playing on the Manitoba team, was to get Joey inside the key, and so that he could post up and get the shots in. So we were quite the little team back in the day. So much gratitude for what I learned in my years with wheelchair basketball. It was 1996. I went to the Atlanta Paralympic Games to watch Joey compete in his first games. And we were there at the opening ceremonies, and Team Canada was coming in, and I got goosebumps, I got tingles, and I thought, I so want to do that. I want to be able to compete for Canada one day. And that's sort of where the dream came to fruition. Then I went home and put that competitive spirit into overdrive and did everything I possibly could to get stronger, faster, better. Went to training camps, went to Wisconsin, competed in every tournament I possibly could to improve my game. And it wasn't until 1998 when I was first named to Team Canada. We competed in Australia for the World Championships, and then in 2000, the Paralympic Games, and both those events we won gold medals. And no greater honor than to compete alongside 11 other incredible women who happen to have disabilities and wear the maple leaf and hear our anthem play and see our flag rise, knowing that you did it as a team, that you came together in unity, understanding each other, accepting each other for all your positives and your flaws. So then after the games I had gotten married to my husband Mark in 1997, and it was kind of, what's my next step, right? I had graduated with my science degree from U of C, had accomplished the goal of competing for Canada, so the next logical step seemed to be, well, let's start a family. And that was the next step. I got pregnant, had our son Kai in 2001, and became a mom, which was interesting because we spoke a little bit about identity and how much our accolades define us, or can we perceive them to define us. And I retired from basketball, and we moved to a small little place called Nanoose Bay on Vancouver Island, where I had no friends, no social network. I was a new mom who happened to have a disability. And it wasn't until my son was about 9 months old when we discovered he had autism. And that threw our whole world into another whirlwind of trying to navigate a system that is complex and complicated and scary for parents. And I felt very alone, and I felt like I didn't have the inclusion, and I felt like I was treated differently because I was a parent with a disability. You know, you can also spin that on the perception of others, that people like me can have children and are parents. And, you know, we've come a long way with perceptions for people with disabilities and what we're capable of, but those stereotypes are still out there. And, you know, constantly throughout my day, even now, you know, where sometimes I get patted on the head, or it happens, or, you know, people are just amazed that I wheeled up the ramp on my own. And you just sit back and go like, this is just life, and this is my life. And, you know, people will often want to help, and I will often refuse help. Very strong and independent and stubborn. And those, I feel that the perception of people, if they don't see me being independent, I'm somehow letting the disabled community down because I'm fighting for them to prove that we are capable. So, yeah. Where was I going? I don't know. I started rambling.
No, that was amazing. So you were talking about sort of how that was connecting to your experiences and moving to athletics and then into politics, and sort of how that journey played out for you, and when you felt like you belonged and didn't belong, which you just clearly touched on.
Yeah, and I think that all comes back to, I think, sort of what matters to you, and how you, what's important to your life and what you want to accomplish when you're here. We all have goals. We all have things we want to do. And, you know, making a difference is important to me. And whether that means in the disabled community or the sport community, and using my voice. And I certainly, after my injury, I've realized the difference my voice can make when I use it. And, you know, speaking out and you know, valuing that my authenticity and my integrity and my values are things that I identify with every day, right? And you know, they help me make the right decisions, I hope. And I hope that those values and that authenticity also helps with my confidence. And then my confidence hopefully shines, and, you know, people see that and trust me and know that it's my integrity that I live by. And I think that kind of loops back to the political realm too, because we talk about belonging. And, you know, being in politics is a sense of belonging, because differing views, right? Differing world views or personalities can feel sometimes very isolating. But when you go into politics and you belong to a particular political party, the people around you share those same values, those same views. And that's a true sense of belonging. And that's sort of, you know, you're seeing the world with similar eyes. And that's where I think I fell into the political role as well, acknowledging how my voice works, how I can make a difference by following my values and my morals and my ethics, but then being surrounded by a group of people who also see things the same way and have that sense of belonging.
And in your role right now, you're a critic, and so how does that sit with your values and being able to like create a pathway and a message that both facilitates sort of belonging and connects to your values, but also allows you to use your voice in a way that's really powerful?
Being a critic is hard, especially for me because I am positive. I like to see the good in everything. And when you're a critic, you basically have to constantly be nitpicking at the bad and finding the gaps and using that pathway to advocate for change. And, I think being the critic has taught me just how important it is to use my voice and stand up for the people who don't have their voice or don't have the stage to use their voice, and share with government the issues that are concerning to them, the impacts that their policies are having on their day-to-day lives. And I cherish the opportunity that I've been given. It's not an easy job to put yourself out there every day and be judged constantly about every move you make and how you make it. And I think we're seeing that even more and more these days in politics, from anything of not wearing a mask or wearing a mask, or, turning the wrong way or not stopping at a stoplight or whatever. It can get very critical and very aggressive and angry very quickly. And you feel like you're on you've always got to be sort of watching your every move and wondering who's watching and how they're judging it.
Yeah, a lot of brave leadership and being able to show up in those circumstances and situations and continue to live by your values and respond in a appropriate way to some of, I'm sure, really difficult situations and criticisms.
But I've also seen much success, right? Like even in the last couple weeks, we've managed to have this government here in British Columbia change their views and change their policies, and realizing the impacts that has on people's lives is pretty great.
Yeah, oh, that's awesome. Joey, I'm going to flip back to you. So in your coaching roles, tell us a little bit about how you facilitate belonging for the players and athletes that you're working with, and what that's sort of looked like and meant, both in Great Britain and now home in Canada, and yeah, a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, well, being a part of a team sport, and I can say this because I've competed in individual sports and team sports, it's that sense of belonging is huge, and it's not always easy because, as Michele mentioned earlier, you get a group of 12 people. Those are 12 unique individuals, and those are just the athletes. Then you have your support staff, you have your coaching staff, and to get everyone pulling in the same direction to have a successful outcome. I mean, I guess you can throw 12 people together and go 12 different ways, but you're not going to get very far. So you want to have those successes, and part of that is having that sense of belonging. So with that being said, I don't think everyone necessarily has to, even like each other when you're in a team, but you have to have that trust, and you have to have that sense of belonging, in that you're all pulling your weight to have a successful outcome. And fortunately for myself, I was able to be a part of a lot of great teams, and we had a lot of strong leaders over the years and great coaches that helped facilitate that helped show us the direction that we wanted to go and the path that we wanted to take to get to that end result, which was, for me, every time I competed, was to win. And going to the Paralympics and stuff, every time I competed, I wanted to be on top of that podium. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's easy, but to do it, for me, when I went to the British program, there were a lot of younger kids involved that time. They were a bit of a transition. They had a group of 4, maybe 5 veteran players, but then a strong group of young kids that were just up and coming. And the way I kind of helped facilitate that sense of belonging to them was just share my experiences, because I'd been there before. I'd been that young kid in a program. The 96 team, my first Paralympic Games, I think we had 6 rookies on that team, 6 first-time Paralympians on that team. So, sharing those experiences and having those experiences to draw on for those young kids, I think really helped them turn into the team that they are today and how successful they are today. And now I'm trying to do the same with the younger Canadian guys that we have. I mean, we have a great group of veteran players still involved in our program, but we have a lot of young kids there. And I just try and pull on my experiences and, being around the sport. I've been around adaptive sport for over 35 years now and at a high level for, 20, 25 years. So I have a lot of those kind of experiences to share.
One of the things that came up a few weeks ago when I had David Legg on Bridges of Belonging was just that a sense of community and belonging that the Paralympic movement seems to just naturally facilitate. And it's just such good people and creates this really welcoming environment right away. And Michele spoke about that, in your first experience going into the gym and seeing wheelchair basketball, that I certainly felt that right away when I got involved in the movement, and I'm so grateful all the time. It feels like I'm always coming home whenever I get to hang out with my friends in the Paralympic world. But you just spoke to that really beautifully, Joey. I loved the comment you made about everyone doesn't need to like each other, but they need to trust each other. I think that's a really excellent way to frame that. Michele, tell us a little bit about your experience transitioning from basketball to athletics and why that choice, and how did belonging play into that?
Well, the transition was, like I mentioned, I had moved to Nanoose Bay and I had no friends and there was nothing for me. I had retired from basketball. There was no job for me. I was at home being a mom, and I took up coaching. I think that's the interesting thing too with Paralympic sport. We all want to stay connected and stay involved. And so I can't even remember how it was, but I found out the Parksville, which was, the neighboring little town of 12,000 people, had a wheelchair basketball team. And so I thought I would head out and try and play. And we actually would take Kai and put him in his little bassinet on the side. And Mark, I met my husband through wheelchair basketball as well. Should add that. He was playing for Team Saskatchewan as an able-bodied player. And so both of us, it was a sport that we could do together. And we went out, and the team was a little green, we'll say. Didn't have a coach, didn't have any real guidance, didn't know plays, didn't understand, knew basic rules, but that was about it. So I found myself on the court right away giving advice and helping and guiding. And then within a few weeks, I had them asking me if I would take on the role of their coach. And it was great because it gave me that opportunity to do things a little differently, not as the athlete, but see it as a different role. And it fit with my schedule, just a couple times a night or a couple times a week and stay involved. But then I started taking those levels to up my coaching abilities, to get coaching certification. And I went to a clinic in Vancouver, and it was a coaching clinic, and they had multiple sports there. And Peter Lawless was there. And at the time he was athletics track and field coach. And we were playing, and part of the role that day was you had to try other sports. So Peter got into a basketball chair, and I was doing some back picking drills with him and teaching him how to maneuver the chair. And he said to me, "You play basketball?" And I said, "Yeah, I play basketball." He's like, "Why? You're quadriplegic. You'd be way better in track and field. You've got really fast hands, fast hands for a quad. You'd be much better for track and field." And I kind of laughed and said, "Yeah, no thanks. I'm not looking for a new sport." And Peter was fairly persistent, we'll say. And he made sure he got my phone number and my email address. He started sending me training reports and asking me to come to various track and field events just to try track. And finally, one rainy April day, they were doing a track meet in Duncan, which is about an hour from my house. And he said, "Why don't you just come down?" So Mark and I said, "Fine, we'll go. Mark, maybe he'll leave me alone if I just go and I do this thing." And it was that day in Duncan where I got in a race chair for the first time. and started pushing, and revived my competitive nature, my spirit, right? Like, it was just, he was walking beside me. I had the odometer. He said, "How fast are you going?" I'm like, 9 kilometers an hour. "Can you go faster?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can go faster." 10 kilometers an hour, 11 kilometers an hour. Now he's like skipping along beside me, and he's got a big grin on his face. And I'm suddenly like pushing harder because I just want to prove something. I don't even know what I wanted to prove. But it felt amazing. And I was hooked then from that moment on. And the great thing about track was it was an individual sport, and I didn't need other people around me. And I could compete when it worked for me, when Kai was sleeping or when Kai was at preschool. And, I could work the timing around my training schedule. I didn't have 11 other people depending on me to show up at the gym at a specific time on a specific day of the week. And that's sort of where it all started. And the next thing I knew, because I already had the athletic side, I already had the mental training, the mental toughness, visualization, all those processes that I had learned in all my time with Tim Frick and Team Canada, that I could just steer into racing. And I went from, first trying it out in 2004 to being at the World Championships for the first time in 2006 and getting a gold and a silver medal. So pretty incredible.
Peter's persistence.
And that's something that, like, I love looking at some of the names of other people who are watching right now and on this line. And the Paralympic community is such a close-knit community. And, I look and I see Archie and I see Alvin, I see Brenda, and, like, people that have had an impact on my life in some way, shape, or form, and connected on some way, shape, or form, and helped with that sense of belonging.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to flip back to wheelchair basketball, because wheelchair basketball is in a bit of a transition phase right now, with some new rules around classification, which most of our audience probably doesn't really know about, but it's leading to some players that have been in the system a long time not necessarily knowing their place or not having a place in what they've traditionally known. So I think that's a piece that it would be interesting to kind of explore a little bit around what that means for their belonging. So Joey, I know you're kind of directly involved in some of this right now, and Michelle, you and I have talked about it as well. So whomever would be interested in kind of diving into that a little bit.
Well, yeah, I'll take the lead on this, I guess. Yeah, so there have been some rule changes as far as classification goes, and it all started with the IPC developing more of a classification guideline to be eligible to compete in the Paralympics. And all sports were supposed to fall in line. And I guess IWBF, who's the governing body for the International Wheelchair Basketball, kind of, drug their heels a little bit on this and didn't meet any of the timelines that IPC had set out for them. So in my opinion, and my opinion only, I do feel that this is a shame, and it's a bit of a travesty, especially for the timing of this. I mean, IPC and IWBF have both been aware of this issue going back to 2015, I believe, but to take action, this first started in January of 2020, when they said that wheelchair basketball was going to be removed from the games for 2024 for sure, and if they didn't get their ducks in a row, so to speak, for the 2020 games as well, unless the IWBF started changing some of their classifications. So the first wave of the reclassifications, I guess, were for all the high pointers in the game. And for those of you who don't know, wheelchair basketball is based on a 1 through 4.5 with half-point increments, and 4.5s being the more abled, I guess, in the sport as far as function goes. And so we've actually recently lost one of our long-term athletes, David Ng, who's been the captain for the last probably 10 years of the team. And I've known David personally since he was about 13. And funny you mentioned, I see Archie's on here. I remember going to tournaments at Variety Village and Archie being there, and Ding and I competing and stuff. So, Yeah, it's a tragedy because of the timing. The games were supposed to be happening in about a month's time, just over a month's time, and for an athlete now to find out that they can no longer go, in my opinion, it's just wrong. Yeah, you know, the mental strain that this has taken on these athletes, some are still in limbo. They're not sure whether they're going to be able to compete or not. They're still doing some of the reclassifications. And the mental strain on the rest of the team, having to lose a teammate that you just worked for a year, 4 years, 8 years, whatever it is, with to try and achieve your goal of competing at the Paralympics together, it's tough.
Yeah, Michele, I know you're going to dive in here, so I'll let you go. Go ahead.
Well, I think, I come from sort of the same perspective as Joey. I think it is an absolute travesty that they have come in this late and didn't take the line of grandfathering and just, allowing it to be where it is for now to compete. Joey did a good job of explaining classification and how that works. And classification's in play to level the playing field. And I don't know how many of the more or the lower point classified athletes are under review. My understanding is it's a lot of the minimal disability classifications that are under review, like David Ng, who's a 4.5 and has a shorter leg length. And for me, I fully support able-bodied athletes competing in wheelchair sports because of the classification system. A 4.5, an able-bodied is a 4.5, and you still have to meet the points on the floor. And if you have somebody who used to play stand-up basketball and has bad knees and can't play in the able-bodied world anymore, why shouldn't they be able to play using a wheelchair at whatever elite level if they're good enough, fast enough, strong enough, and put the effort in? I know, Andrea, you and I talked about, oftentimes when we find new athletes, right? It's like Joey mentioned, when I came into the gym and I was excited to compete, you kind of like hang on to that person and you almost fill them up with the idea that the Paralympics is something that you can aspire to go to. And that's the same thing for an able-bodied child who is good at gymnastics or is good at basketball or hockey or whatever. If they're good at something, you push them to excel and to reach their full potential, and you give them that opportunity to believe in themselves that they could maybe go to the Olympics one day. And I believe that the Paralympics, and it won't work for every sport, obviously, but in wheelchair basketball, it's one of those sports that it does work for, that anybody can compete. And it will only raise the bar for, I think, the games and for the competition. And I think it's such a travesty right now to see what's happening. And I hope that there will be a reevaluation, especially for people like David, who doesn't deserve to end his career like this. And for those other athletes who are in the limbo right now. Make your decision and make sure that you've got a good plan in place in the future, but don't exclude the opportunity for people to compete. We're talking here today about belonging and inclusion, and what are they doing? They're excluding and complete opposite. So it's kind of...
If I could just expand on a little bit of what Michele's saying there. I believe also that AB's able-bodied athletes should be able to compete in wheelchair basketball at the highest level, because wheelchair basketball is probably the most unique sport in the world, in that the wheelchair is the leveler. It levels the playing field. There's no difference than Mikey sitting in a basketball chair or myself sitting in a basketball chair, because the classification works that way. And as Mikey said, when we first started playing together, we worked well together because that's the team dynamic of it. Her classification worked well with my classification in working together on offense and defense. And I know for me as a young boy, when I got my hip disease and the able-bodied sporting world was taken away from me, I was heartbroken and depressed. And wheelchair basketball afforded me an opportunity to continue competing in sport with my siblings and my peers my peer group that I already had. It introduced me to a whole different world of adaptive sport and a whole new peer group as well. But this was the leveled playing field where we could all compete together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I worked hard when I was at the grassroots level to introduce sport chairs as a piece of regular sporting equipment to kids, so they would know that that was an opportunity, and to try and ensure that they had an opportunity to try and explore what wheeling felt like as a fundamental movement skill for every child. And for anyone that's ever tried wheelchair basketball, like trying to get the ball up to the net is really hard. That's a lot lower than in a standing position for sure. So there's a lot of upper body strength required. Teddy Katz has asked us a question. Do you think there should be a minimum qualification for wheelchair basketball? Some might argue that it would take spots away from athletes with a disability without that. So you just spoke a little bit about that, Joey. Do you want to dive into that question a little bit?
I've heard that argument a lot before, that, you know, adaptive sports created for people with profound injuries or disabilities. And I do agree with that. I would never say, you know, if that kids program I talked about when I'd go out on a Tuesday night or a Saturday morning to compete. Now, if an able-bodied kid had come in and kicked me out of the chair and said, no, this is mine, I'm taking it, you know, I'm missing out on an opportunity for that. But with enough equipment and enough coaching, I believe that it would increase opportunities for kids with disabilities. Like I mentioned, growing up here in Winnipeg, we don't have a ton of athletes with disabilities who wanted to compete in wheelchair basketball. There's so many different sports out there, able-bodied and adaptive. To find a group of people who are interested in playing basketball, we probably, or I know for sure, I would not have had the opportunities I had if we didn't include able-bodied athletes. There have been years where we wouldn't have had enough athletes for teams. So it's not much fun to go play at a basketball practice and have, you know, 4 athletes out there. Basketball is meant to be played 5-on-5. To train week in, week out, 4-on or 2-on-2 or whatever, you know, it went to work. But we were able to supplement that with our able-bodied athletes, and we had a rec league for a while that we had 4 teams based out of Winnipeg, and Winnipeg's a city of what, 700,000 people, and to have 4 adaptive teams competing out of there, that's saying something. So I would disagree with that statement. I think it would create more opportunities for people.
I agree. Yeah, and in fact, that team, Joey, in Winnipeg, I'm pretty sure it was your cousin, your sister, your brother, me, Mark. You know, we were just a family team, right? Because it was what we could work, just so we could have that opportunity. And I think by allowing it to expand, we open up the scope for people to see, able-bodied peoples, because then they bring their friends, their family, and you know, then those people get to see what people with disabilities can accomplish, what we're capable of, and opens their eyes to a whole new world. I think it's only a benefit for society as a whole. You know, I agree that if there's not enough equipment and you're going to take a chair away from a disabled child who has no other option, that's a problem. But certainly, just because you have a disability doesn't mean that you're going to make the Paralympic team.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a really interesting piece that's sort of been a bit of a, I don't know, selling feature of the Paralympics that we seem to use, which is not particularly helpful, because that's not necessarily the path that people want either. Like, Paralympics can also be pretty intimidating when you're starting out to be like, oh, we're gonna take you there. When really, you know, the premise of disability sport is that it is very inclusive of all, and the opportunity to play something like wheelchair basketball, where you can play up to a certain level regardless of your ability or disability, is a phenomenal leveler. So we have a, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think there's other sports that works for too, like track and field has a classification system. We had Kelly Smith's brother here in BC, Kevin, who wanted to compete and sat on his legs, squished in, and he could feel his legs, right? But he wanted to compete and wasn't allowed to. Or hand cycling, like once you're strapped and you're laying down, that's what the classification system is there for, to allow that opportunity.
We have a couple of comments and another question. So Michelle's commented in the chat box that adaptive sport really is so much more inclusive than the general public thinks. And I think that's part of what draws me to it, and part of why I love the community around it is that it's just everyone's welcome. Like, we'll find a place for you to contribute and be a part of our family. And then Northern Adaptive Sports has said, how do you feel the changes will impact the quality of the games when Tokyo finally arrives? And do you think it will make a difference based on the classification changes we've seen so far? Joey, you want to take that?
Very good question. Well, I guess I could start off with, if the 2020-21 games actually do take place, the quality of them will, you know, I can see this getting a lot worse before it gets better, because the analogy I used once in an interview a few months ago is that there are certain teams, all the qualifying tournaments have happened, so we know the teams that are going to be competing at the Tokyo Games. So use Canada as an example. So we basically had, according to the rules now, an ineligible player compete for us. And we beat out teams like Argentina, who is a very strong program, but they aren't going to get to compete at the Tokyo Games. How does that sit well with them? Other examples, I know Germany and GB both have some players that are in question right now as well, and Poland didn't qualify. So are they going to have to redo all these qualifying tournaments for these teams to become eligible, or are they just going to say, like, that doesn't matter, we have the team selected? And it's tricky because parasport now is so well funded, and when there's jobs and money involved, it gets messier before it gets better, in my opinion.
Michelle, do you want to weigh in?
I was just going to say that when I switched over to politics, many people asked me what I knew about politics coming from sport. And there's more politics in sport than anywhere else, as far as I know.
Expert.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a pretty politicized system. So I just want to circle back. We have a few more minutes together. As you kind of reflect on your journey and where belonging's shown up and how that's influenced where you are now and the worlds you're creating for others, how did self play into that? How did you have to sort of figure out who you were and where you fit before you could kind of show up in the different situations, environments, teams that you've been a part of?
You want me to start again?
Sure.
Well, for me, I can say, as that 8-9-year-old boy, when I first started in adaptive sport, I didn't think I belonged. In hearing about adaptive sport and hearing about kids competing in wheelchairs or adaptive equipment, I'm like, that's not me. You know, I'm Joey. I play hockey. I'm a part of the able-bodied world. That's not my world. And happily and luckily, my mom wouldn't take no for an answer and dragged me out there and showed it to me. And so that self, the believing and the perception of who you are and stuff, that helped break down those barriers for me, and starting to understand who I was. The equipment didn't define who I was. It wasn't a pair of skates that made me who I was. It wasn't a wheelchair who makes me who I am. And it was at that point in time where I started to kind of understand what self was for me.
Michelle?
Well, I think when you have a life-altering injury, you go through all those stages of grief, and acceptance finally comes, and sometimes it takes longer to get there. I mean, sometimes you get stuck in certain stages, but you have to eventually, well, for me, I eventually came to terms with the fact that I couldn't change whether or not I had a spinal cord injury. It was something I didn't have control over, as much as I enjoy having control over most things in my life. It was an aspect that I couldn't change. And I think then over the years, life experiences help build who you are and formulate how you view yourself, and to realize that that self-respect and that unconditional self-acceptance was something that helped me realize that nobody's perfect. We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses, but we certainly have the resources available to us to help improve ourselves. And, you know, reaching out to those people that are in our circles who can help form who we want to be, choosing who we have in our circles when they don't match our values or aren't supporting you in a way. Like, we have those opportunities to sort of focus on our unique talents and our abilities. And I think that's a key thing for me, is always focusing on the ability, and then just trying to be the best that I can be and accepting it for what it is.
Excellent. That is a lovely towards ending sentiment. Do you have any last words you want to share in terms of reflections on today, reflections on your journey, Michele?
I think just, you know, for people to understand that inclusion is a choice. You decide whether or not you include someone or not. You know, when we talk about belonging is that feeling of, you know, now I don't know how I want to say it. It's the culture that you purposely create, right? It's that feeling. And so there's the difference there. But if we include people and we make that choice and we accept people, hopefully we're all better at the end.
It's a lovely last sentiment to leave us with. Thank you for that. Joey, how about you? Do you want to share something?
No, I like what Michele just said. Inclusion is a choice, and it's you know, ignorance, I think, is what holds a lot of people back, and education is the only cure for ignorance. And to help break down those barriers, we need to do our part and help educate people, and you know, that's will help with that inclusion.
Education is the only cure for ignorance. I love that. Thank you. Archie's put a comment in here in the comment box just saying, thank you, Michele and Joey. You're incredible athletes, leaders, and advocates. So many of our youngsters and individuals interested in sport after an injury or diagnosis recognize you as influencers to get involved and active. Thank you. So I think that's a lovely way to sort of wrap us up today. And I just want to express my gratitude to both Michele and Joey for saying yes to me and to being part of Bridges of Belonging and sharing their stories, and also helping kind of educate us as well around some of the shifts that are happening in some of these sports and what that's going to mean as we go forward in the Paralympic system. So thank you both for being here today. And really grateful to have everyone join us. And I'm just going to share next week's speakers who had just put a note in the chat box. So next week we have Archie Allison as one of our guests. And Archie is just a phenomenal leader in the parasports system and in supporting individuals with disabilities through the work he does at Variety Village and well beyond. And then we also have Tracy Smith, who is a motivational speaker, businesswoman, entrepreneur, and just a firecracker. So super excited to have both of them join Bridges next week. And hopefully everyone here will join us as well. Thank you again, Michele and Joey, and wishing everyone just an amazing day.
Thank you.